Hi, and welcome to this ForNAV coffee break. My name is René Brummel. I'm a product specialist at ForNAV, and I will be your presenter today. As this coffee break is live, you can ask your questions via the GoToWebinar question window. We will answer them at the end of the coffee break. Today, we're going to add temporary tables to the AL file of your ForNAV reports. In some cases, you need to dynamically create a dataset for your Business Central reports. You may need to merge data from several tables, calculate values, or work with a complex dataset. Some examples are getting VAT lines, slot and serial numbers, data from web services, and queries. There are two ways of getting data for your temporary tables. You can let ForNAV get the data, or you can write the code to get the data yourself. We've discussed the first option in a previous coffee break. Today we're going to discuss how to get temporary data through your own AL code. To demonstrate adding temporary tables, I'm going to use these steps. The prerequisites, what do I need to get going? In step 2, I will add a VAT line data item to my report. In step 3, I will add a new temporary data item. In step 4, I will get the data from a query. Let's start with the first step. Today, I will add temporary tables in the Business Central on-premise server with the Business Central 2022 Wave 1 release. I have installed the universal code version of the ForNAV customizable report pack, and I've executed the step-by-step wizard from the assisted setup to get started. Of course, everything I do today is also available in the Business Central SaaS environment. I also have Visual Studio Code and the ForNAV Designer installed on my PC. The ForNAV Designer can be downloaded from the ForNAV website. The first thing we will do is add a temporary data item for which we have built-in business logic, like the VAT amount line. We need to call the ForNAV business logic from the AL file of a new report I've created a new report for this in a new VS Code extension. So let's go and have a look. It's a pretty simple report in a pretty simple extension. It's got a bunch of tables from the previous coffee break, and I've got a simple invoice report. So what do I need to do to add a table to this report? Obviously, I am working in VS Code, which means I need to open the report from the file. So I'll open the report from the myinvoice.report.al file. And in this AL file, you will notice I've got a pretty simple report. I've got a header, which is the sales invoice header. I've got the line. I've got a footer and some other sections. To add a data item to this report, I will simply add a data item, drop it on top of the header, and I will type a VAT amount line, which will get me the VAT amount line. And once I have this data item, I need to do a few things to it. First thing I'm going to do is to change the variable name, because that makes it working with the variable inside AL a bit easier. And of course, I'm going to set temporary to true. Everything I've done here can be done in VS Code as well. I just think it's easier to add a data item in ForNAV and set my tables that way. The other thing I can do, because I'm in ForNAV anyway, is to add the sections and the fields that I want to display. So I will just grab the fields from the VAT amount line. I will grab the VAT identifier, VAT percentage, line amount, VAT amount and VAT base, and I will simply drop them on top of my data item, which will get me the header, body and footer sections. I quickly do some formatting so everything looks nice. So there we go. I've got a new temporary VAT amount line with the header, the body and the footer. I can save my report, which will save the report in my AL file in my extension. So I'll close it in ForNAV and move over to VS Code. And in my report, you will notice that I've got my new data item, the VAT amount line, which is a temporary data item. ForNAV will not get the code for this temporary data item automatically, so I need to do that manually. To do so, I will simply add a new function in my report. I can type really quickly. So the function I've added is called getVATAmountLines. It uses the ForNAV getVATAmountLines code unit, and what it does is it will delete all of my VAT amount lines, and it will get the new VAT amount lines through the ForNAV code units. ForNAV code units are open source, so you can have a look at the code inside there. We don't really have time to do that today, so I will move on. Of course, I need to call this code from a trigger, so I will add a new trigger to my header, and in this trigger I will say get VAT amount lines. That's all I have to do. Right now I can publish my extension to my own server. We'll have to wait a little while for everything to be published. And when it is, I can find my report inside Business Central. Or at least I can find my report once everything has published and finished loading. So open my ForNAV My Reports. There I will find my invoice. And on this invoice, if I preview it, and it looks like today is the day where everything in Business Central is going to take forever. So I'm sorry about that, but I'm sure this report will finish loading soon. There we go. You will notice I've got my report with my normal report lines, and underneath I have my VAT stuff that ForNAV has gotten and displayed for me. So that's the first thing we have done, just getting some data in a temporary data item through the standard ForNAV code units. Of course, it may also happen that we need to add a temporary data item for which we need to write our own logic. The first step to do this is to add a data item, and this can be an existing table or a new specific one. And specifically for this webinar, I've created a new table. So let's go and have a look back in VS Code. In VS Code, you will notice I have my item sales table.al, and this item sales table.al is a very simple table. It's got an entry number, a document number, a posting date, an item number, and an item ledger entry quantity. That's all it is. It's got the table type set to temporary because I'm not going to use this table for anything other than for holding temporary data inside my report, and later on I will fill this temporary data item with data from a query, but right now all I need to do is add it to my report. So go back to ForNAV, open my report again, and then inside my report I can add another data item, and this time the data item is going to be my per tenant table, so I'll find PTE item sales. I had published this extension before, I've created this extension before. If you have just created the table and published the table inside Business Central, you may need to close and reopen the ForNAV designer for ForNAV to reload your table information. So obviously I've done that before, so I can just load my PTE item sales table. So I've got that. Then I will do the same as I did before. I will change my data item variable name to temp item sales, and of course I need to set temporary to true, otherwise ForNAV will look inside Business Central in the database for data, which it is not going to have. So I need to set it to temporary. Then I can do the same thing as I did before. I can grab some data from my temp item sales, so I will get what am I going to get? Let's grab the document number, item number, posting date, and the item ledger entry quantity. Place it there. And make my captions bold again. So that adds the temp item table sales on my report. And if I save it, and go back to VS Code, you will notice that in VS Code I now have my temp item sales data item. Finally, we can add the code to populate the temporary data item. We can choose any way of collecting data from Business Central, and for this coffee break we'll use a query. A query is a fast way to collect a lot of data from the database. So which query are we going to use? This is a coffee break about ForNAV, so we're not going to make any new queries, so I will just use a standard Business Central query. And I will call that query with a little bit of code, which I will type really quickly again. So what I've got is I've got a new procedure called getTempData, and in this getTempData I get data from a query, which is the item sales by customer. And if we have a look at this query, if I go to the definition, you will notice this query has a bunch of fields. It uses the value entry table. It links the value entry table to the customer table, which it links to the item table. So in one go I can get data from 3 tables. Then we'll load that table in a bunch of fields, which you will recognize. I've got the document number, posting date, item number, and the item ledger entry quantities. And of course I need to get this table with my customer number, because I only want the entries for the specific customer that I'm working with on this report, which is where the customer table comes in. We have the customer number field, which I can use to filter. So looking at the code, what I'm going to use is I'm going to delete all of the entries in my temporary data item, because I don't want data from any previous header records. So we'll start with an empty table. Then we do an item sales by customer set range on customer number, which we filter on the bill to customer number. Then we open, then we read, and whilst I'm reading data from my query, I'm going to fill the fields inside my temp item sales table that I've created. Finally, I will do an insert, so the data is inside my temp item table query. So that's all I need to do. It's pretty simple, and the only thing I still need to do is call the function. So I'll call the getTempData. So there we go, we've added the table on our report, we've added the code to populate the temporary table so I can publish to my server. Now let's see what happens if we run the report. Hopefully it will not take forever this time, but it may do. There we go. So now we have our invoice, which has the VAT amount lines, but it also has a list of documents that are related to this specific customer. So let's recap what we just did. The first thing we did was to add a temporary VAT line data item. We added the code to populate the temporary data item in the AL file of our report, and we used a standard ForNAV function to do so. The second thing we wanted to do was to get the data from a query inside our report. Since we can't read a query directly inside a report, we had to use a temporary data item. To do this, we created a custom table and added that as a temporary data item in our report. We wrote a function that gets the data for this temporary data item from a query. All of the code I've used is available on GitHub, or it is going to be once I have uploaded it after this coffee break. For now, let's wrap up. Thank you for listening to me so far. I can see we have no questions at the moment, so I will wrap up this coffee break. If you want to know more about ForNAV, or if you want to download the ForNAV Designer and Converter, please visit our website. If you want to install ForNAV in Business Central Cloud, please visit the Microsoft App Source. You can watch more videos about ForNAV on our YouTube channel, and if you have any questions about ForNAV, please email them to support@fornav.com. For a full list of upcoming and recorded coffee breaks, please visit fornav.com/coffeebreak. Thank you very much for listening today, and I will see you in the next coffee break. Goodbye.